On a quiet stretch of beach, by a gray, gentle sea, two young twin brothers would often wander and dream together. Stanford Pines and his twin Stanley grew up by the ocean's edge, where waves softly lapped the shore and seagulls cried in the distance. Stanford, born just a few minutes before his brother, was a curious, bright-eyed boy with an unusual gift. He had 6 fingers on each hand, a quirk of nature that set him apart. Sometimes other children would tease him for this odd difference, but Stanley, who was smaller and often timid, stood bravely by his brother's side. They were inseparable, exploring tide pools under the warm sun by day and whispering their hopes under the stars by night, each twin finding comfort in the other's company. From the time they could walk, the twins shared a special bond. Stanley was boisterous and protective, quick to place himself between Ford, his family's nickname for Stanford, and any bullies who might taunt them. And Ford, gentle and brilliant, would in turn encourage Stanley whenever he felt unsure of himself. On clear afternoons, they scoured the sands of glass-shard beach for hidden treasures, imagining they might discover a rare coin or a message in a bottle. With each discovery, a pretty shell, a piece of sea glass catching the sunlight, the boys would weave grand stories of the adventures they would have when they were older. Their hearts set on exploration. They even started building a little boat from scraps of wood and old sailcloth. They lovingly named it the Stan-O-War, a vessel for future voyages, and they painted the name in uneven letters on its side while dreaming of the distant horizons they would one day reach together. As they grew older, summers by the seaside gave way to busy school days. Stanford's brilliance in science became clear to everyone. He would stay up late at the kitchen table under the yellow light of a single lamp, tinkering with homemade experiments and scribbling in worn notebooks. Stanley would sit nearby, sometimes nodding off, but always there to cheer Ford on or hand him a screwdriver when he needed one. Their tiny attic bedroom was filled with Ford's science fair ribbons and Stanley's cherished postcards of far-off places, reminders of both the talent and the shared dreams that filled their little home. When high school came, Stanford's dedication paid off in an extraordinary way. In his senior year, he crafted an ingenious, perpetual motion machine, a device of whirring gears and polished wood that seemed to spin impossibly on its own. Late one afternoon in the school gymnasium, beneath banners and bright project displays, Ford gently set his machine into motion for the judges. Its smooth, endless rotation left the small audience in awe. Among them was a professor from a prestigious college on the opposite coast. Impressed by Ford's invention, the professor offered him a rare scholarship to a top engineering school, a chance that could launch Ford's dreams beyond the boundaries of their town. Stanford was overjoyed. He clutched the acceptance letter in his hand on the walk home, sea breeze rustling the paper, imagining a future where he might study the mysteries of the universe. But that evening, in the quiet of their garage, where the half-finished Stan-O-War rested, tension stirred between the twins. Stanley, proud as he was of his brother, felt a pang of fear at the thought of Ford leaving for college so far away. The brothers had promised to take on the world together, to sail their boat and hunt for treasure side by side. Stan tried to voice his worries, his words halting and eyes downcast. Ford listened, heart torn, trying to reassure his twin that nothing would ever truly separate them. Under the dim light of a single hanging bulb, They spoke in hushed tones. Ford's voice was full of hope for his new adventure, but Stanley's was laced with anxiety. In that tender moment, both boys realized how much their futures meant to one another. They ended the night with a quiet hug, the unspoken hope that their bond was unbreakable. Fate, however, took a different turn on the day Ford's science project was to be shipped off for final review. In an attempt to delay what he feared would be their parting, Stanley accidentally jostled the workbench where the delicate machine rested. In a breathless instant, gears and pieces tumbled to the floor with a gentle clatter. The perpetual motion machine was broken. Stanley's hands shook as he tried to gather the scattered pieces, mumbling apologies, saying he hadn't meant for this to happen. When Stanford walked in and saw the ruin of his proud creation, his heart fell silent and cold. A few broken springs and splintered wood now lay in a heap where years of hard work had been. Ford's voice barely rose above a whisper as he asked what had occurred. Stanley, tears in his eyes, tried to explain that it was an accident born of panic and fear of losing his brother. But to Ford, in that fragile, heart-wrenching moment, it felt like a betrayal of their dreams. In the days that followed, a heavy silence fell between the brothers. Word of the broken project reached their father, and the disappointment in the household was palpable. The scholarship was lost. The prestigious college withdrew its offer upon hearing of the mishap. One chilly morning, after an agonizing family argument, their father's stern voice echoed in the small kitchen. He held Stanley responsible for the loss of a life-changing opportunity, and, in a harsh decree born of anger and dashed hopes, he told Stanley to leave their home. Stanford watched from the doorway, tears blurring his vision, as his twin brother, his closest friend, packed a few belongings and stepped out into the cold world alone. Stanley paused for a moment on the front stoop, casting one last look back at Ford. Both boys' eyes brimmed with sorrow. Ford longed to call out, to tell Stan to stay or that he forgave him, but the words caught in his throat. The door closed, and in that quiet, heartbroken moment, Stanford Pines felt more alone than he ever had in his life. With Stanley gone, time seemed to creep forward in a haze. Stanford, enveloped in regret and longing, tried to focus on what lay ahead. Unable to attend the famed West Coast Tech, he instead enrolled at a smaller, humbler college called Backup S'more University. Far from the ocean home of his childhood, Ford immersed himself in study. The campus was quiet, with ivy-covered halls and old oak trees that whispered in the wind. Late at night in the library, Ford would lose himself in books about physics, engineering, and the unexplained phenomena that had always fascinated him. He pushed himself relentlessly, pouring all his grief and hope into academic pursuits, as if knowledge could fill the hole in his heart. Professors marveled at the young man's dedication. In a few short years, driven by sleepless nights and a passion that burned steady and constant, Stanford earned degree after degree. Eventually, he achieved something astonishing. Not one, but many doctorates in record time. His achievements brought him accolades and research grants, yet each triumph felt a little hollow, with no brother to share it with. During his graduate studies, Stanford found a friend in a fellow researcher named Fiddleford McGucket. Fiddleford, a genial Southern inventor with a bright mind, became Ford's closest confidant. Together they would talk for hours in the lab, their voices low and excited as they swapped ideas. In Fiddleford's easy humor and brilliant mechanical know-how, Ford found a hint of the camaraderie he had lost. The two built odd little gadgets for fun, a device to make objects float on a magnetic field, or a quirky machine that could swap the salt and pepper in shakers. These small inventions brought a gentle laughter back into Stanford's life. He realized that, for the first time in a while, he didn't feel completely alone. Even as he excelled in conventional science, Stanford's mind kept drifting to mysteries that defied logic. He remembered those nights on the beach with Stanley, when they'd looked up at stars and wondered what secrets the world held. Perhaps it was that memory, or perhaps simply the question of his own extra fingers. But Ford became enthralled by the idea of anomalies, things that science couldn't yet explain. For his doctoral research, he decided to investigate these odd occurrences with serious rigor. He combed through newspaper archives and old journals for reports of supernatural happenings across the country, time slips, strange creatures, uncanny coincidences. One pattern emerged like a beacon in the data. A small, wooded town in Oregon kept appearing in these stories. Gravity Falls. The name itself whispered of mystery and hidden depth. Many curious things seemed drawn to that one remote valley of pine trees and rolling hills. Ford felt a quiet thrill as he realized this could be the place he was meant to find. With a substantial research grant he had earned, Stanford set off to Gravity Falls, Oregon. He arrived on a crisp summer day, the air alive with the scent of pine and wildflowers. The town was quaint and unassuming at first glance, nestled among tall trees that seemed to watch knowingly. Using his grant money, Ford commissioned a small laboratory on the outskirts of the forest. Local craftsmen, including a burly young lumberjack named Manly Dan, helped build the research cabin with sturdy logs and metal beams. When it was finished, Stanford Pines stood before a modest yet state-of-the-art cabin lab deep in the woods, a new home, and a place where he could finally explore the mysteries that had called to him. In the evenings, as crickets sang outside and the sky burned orange and pink at dusk, Ford began to chronicle everything he encountered. He started a series of journals, leather-bound books that he filled with observations and sketches. Late at night by lantern light, he wrote about the oddities he found. Little gnome-like men who roamed the forest at twilight, a family of multi-bear, a creature with the heads of several bears in one, drinking from the creek at dawn, a shy, shape-shifting creature he glimpsed lurking in a cave. Each page was a testament to something incredible. Ford's handwriting flowed neatly across diagrams of enigmatic symbols and starlit maps of the forest, his six-fingered hand sometimes leaving smudges of ink in his fervor. These journals became an extension of his mind, a place where wonder and knowledge met. And yet, as wondrous as his days were, in the quiet nights under the swaying pines, he still felt the ache of loneliness. His triumphs and discoveries were still made in solitude, with no Stanley beside him to marvel at them. Over time, the people of Gravity Falls grew curious about the reclusive scientist in their woods. Occasionally, Ford ventured into town for supplies. Thick notebooks, unusual metals, a slice of pie from the diner, and he would overhear townsfolk swapping tales of the local oddities. It comforted him that others sensed the magic of this place too, even if they didn't understand it. Some nights, a knock would sound at his cabin door. His friend Fiddleford had arrived from California to join his research. Fiddleford McGucket, excited by Ford's letters about supernatural phenomena, eagerly lent his engineering talents. Together, in the quiet hum of that forest laboratory, they built machines to test the limits of reality. One device was a carpet that could swap minds between those who stepped on it, a playful experiment that made them laugh at its success. Another invention was a strange metal tie meant to subtly influence the wearer's mind, a project jokingly inspired by an idea to calm down world leaders. Each invention and entry in the journals brought Ford a sense of accomplishment. The lab, lit by the soft glow of lamps at midnight, felt warm with curiosity and companionship. Those were some of the happiest days Stanford had known since losing his brother. A gentle rhythm of discovery, with a friend by his side and the mysteries of Gravity Falls unfolding like a story. One summer, as Ford delved deeper into the secrets of Gravity Falls, he stumbled upon something that would change everything. Deep in the woods, an entrance to a hidden cave revealed itself behind a veil of hanging moss. The cave's interior was cool and echoing, its walls adorned with mysterious hieroglyphics carved ages ago. By the flicker of his flashlight, Ford traced the symbols with his fingertips. They seemed to tell a story of a powerful being named Bill Cipher, an otherworldly entity who knew endless secrets. In the center of the cave, an odd circular design was etched into the stone floor. A wheel of symbols, each icon strange yet somehow familiar. A pine tree, a shooting star, a hand with 6 fingers, and more. Ancient legend hinted that if all these symbols united, they could unleash a force to defeat the demon the cave spoke of. But Stanford, ever the scientist, regarded this with skepticism, thinking it a local myth or a metaphor. Still, he was drawn to the idea of Bill Cipher, this all-knowing being. In that dim cave, voice hushed and heart pounding gently with curiosity, Ford read aloud an incantation engraved beside the images, hoping for answers to the puzzles that eluded him. His words echoed and faded, and for a moment, nothing but the distant drip of water could be heard. Ford let out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding and began to turn away, when a whisper of laughter curled through the air. A shimmering triangle of light appeared before him, a shape with a single eye and a playful, top-hatted form. It was Bill Cipher, the demon, appearing not as a monster, but as a peculiar smiling symbol, greeted Stanford like an old friend. His voice in Ford's mind was oddly cheerful and reassuring. He introduced himself as a sort of muse, claiming he had guided brilliant minds throughout history. Stanford, who hungered for knowledge and had long felt on the brink of a grand discovery, found himself listening to this strange being. Bill offered wisdom, answers to questions that had kept Ford awake at night. He told Ford that the mysteries of Gravity Falls were just the beginning, that whole worlds of knowledge lay beyond, if only Ford had the means to reach them. In the stillness of that cavern, under the spell of Bill's charismatic promises, Stanford Pines made a quiet pact with the dream demon. At first, Bill's presence felt like a gift. In the privacy of Ford's mind, Bill would whisper insights and point him toward new paths of research. Ford's work accelerated. He sketched blueprints for for an ambitious machine, a portal that could bridge dimensions, allowing travel to the farthest corners of reality. It was an idea beyond cutting edge, something no other scientist on Earth would dare attempt. Night after night, by lamplight, Ford refined the designs with Bill's guiding words echoing in his thoughts. There were times when Stanford felt a stinging pressure behind his right eye, a sign of Bill wandering through his mind, but he dismissed it as exhaustion or excitement. So eager he was to learn and achieve, Ford overlooked the subtle warnings of danger. He even found himself idly carving a triangle into the wooden desk, or collecting odd triangular trinkets for his cabin, unconsciously welcoming Bill's influence into his life. With the portal plans in hand, Stanford called upon Fiddleford for help. McGucket arrived once more in Gravity Falls, happy to assist his friend with a grand new project. Inside the research cabin's basement, they began construction. Sparks flew from welding torches, and the air smelled of hot metal and solder as the two built towering machines to channel untold energies. The portal's frame was a great metal ring covered in mysterious runes and circuitry that Ford had devised. Despite the secrecy, Ford felt a flush of pride and anticipation. Soon he might step through this gateway and see the wonders Bill promised with his own eyes. But as the portal neared completion, Ford's behavior grew more intense. He became distant at times, muttering to himself as Bill's voice murmured in his mind. Fiddleford noticed his friend's eyes, once warm and full of curiosity, now often shadowed by worry or caught in a faraway stare. Late one night, long after midnight, they decided to test a small activation of the portal. The machine roared to life in the underground lab, the metal ring crackling with electricity and forming a swirling blue-green window into the unknown. Stanford and Fiddleford looked on in awe, but that awe turned to terror in an instant. A sudden mechanical surge yanked Fiddleford toward the portal's maw. He clung desperately to a railing as part of his body slipped through the shimmering veil. Ford lunged forward and hit the emergency shutdown, pulling his friend back to safety. Fiddleford collapsed onto the floor, eyes wide and skin ashen. In that brief moment on the other side, he had seen something. Visions of chaos so overwhelming that tears ran down his face. Trembling, he stammered that what lay beyond was not the enlightenment they imagined, but nightmares not meant for human eyes. Ford's heart pounded as he helped his friend up. The look in Fiddleford's eyes, of raw fear and disillusionment, struck Ford deeply. Shaken, Fiddleford quietly decided he could no longer be part of the project. With a heavy heart, Stanford watched his friend pack up and leave Gravity Falls, bidding him a gentle farewell on the front porch of the cabin as dawn's first light touched the trees. Ford understood. He could see the trauma in Fiddleford's haunted gaze. And for the first time in a while, Stanford allowed himself to question the path he was on. In the stillness after Fiddleford's departure, alone in the lab that morning, Ford looked at the dormant portal and the eerie lights still dancing on its surface. Bill was curiously silent in his mind. A faint ache throbbed behind Ford's eye again. Doubt crept into Stanford's thoughts like a chill breeze. What had he done? Stanford returned to his journals, flipping through page after page of notes and sketches, trying to find clues he might have missed about Bill's true intentions. Details that once seemed benign now felt sinister. The ancient carvings had warned of a demon, and Ford realized with a sinking feeling that he had invited that very demon into his mind. In a surge of resolve, he broke contact with Bill, forcing the demon out of his thoughts and closing his mind like slamming a door. Bill's furious howl echoed once in the distant corners of Ford's consciousness and then was gone. To make sure the demon could never take control again, Stanford rigged together a protective device, a simple metal plate hidden in a band that he fit around his head. It would scramble Bill's access to his mind, preventing the demon from ever reading his thoughts or possessing him outright again. With Bill Cipher shut out and the portal looming ominously in the lab, Ford felt truly alone once more, but he knew what had to be done. He shut down the portal's power and removed a key component, determined that no one should ever use it. In his journals, he began writing in coded riddles and invisible ink, fearful that Bill might still be watching somehow, waiting for a chance to strike. Each creak of the old cabin at night, each rustle of wind outside, set Stanford on edge. He fortified the basement, turning parts of his lab into a safe room lined with lead and strange technology. Project Mentum, he called one apparatus, designed to guard a mind against psychic intruders. Still, sleep came with difficulty. Ford would sometimes pace the lab in the early hours, hearing his own heart echo in the emptiness, jumping at shadows. He sealed away dangerous artifacts, including the disassembled pieces of the portal, and even his research journals, fearing they could be misused. Days turned into weeks, and paranoia weighed on Stanford's weary soul. By now, he understood Bill's true aim. The demon wanted to use the portal to tear into their world, to cause unimaginable chaos. Ford knew he had narrowly averted a disaster, but the knowledge was a heavy burden to carry alone. He missed Fiddleford's reassuring presence, and more than ever, he missed Stanley, longed for the comfort of family, someone who might help him bear the fear. At last, with trembling hands, Stanford reached out in the only way he could. He penned a letter to his estranged twin. In careful words that couldn't fully hide his desperation, Ford asked Stanley to come to Gravity Falls, hinting that he was in trouble and needed his brother's help. He sent the message off and waited, each day anxiously watching the dirt road that led to his cabin, hoping to see a familiar figure emerge between the trees. And indeed, one rainy afternoon, Stanley Pines arrived in Gravity Falls. Stanford was alerted by the crunch of tires on gravel outside the lab. Peering through the window, he saw his brother stepping out of a rickety car, looking older, road-worn, and uncertain. Stanford's heart raced with a mixture of joy and nervousness. It had been so many years. He hurried outside as the drizzle fell. The two brothers stood facing each other in the clearing by the cabin, rain matting Stanley's hair to his forehead, droplets clinging to Ford's coat. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, with a tentative smile and a crack in his voice, Stanford managed a soft greeting. "Stanley, you came." In that gentle acknowledgement, years of distance began to melt away. But the reunion was not destined to be simple. After the first relief, old hurts and misunderstandings surfaced. Stanley had believed Ford wanted him back to mend their bond. He had dreamed of apologizing and making things right at last. Stanford, however, was so consumed by the looming threat of Bill and the need to hide the journals that he struggled to articulate any brotherly affection. He showed Stanley the strange machinery and scribbled notes, explaining in rushed tones the danger of Bill Cipher and why they needed to secure the research. Stanley, who had lived a very different life, filled with survival and regret, barely understood the talk of demons and portals. He felt frustrated and hurt that even now, Ford seemed more concerned with his work than with truly reconciling. What Stanley wanted was his brother back. What Stanford needed was a helping hand against the apocalypse he feared. Tension crackled in the humid air of the lab as they moved through the cluttered space. Dust motes swirled in the light of a single lamp as the brothers raised their voices, all the words they had held back over the years spilling forth. Stanley accused Ford of caring more about codes and monsters than family. Ford retorted that Stanley couldn't understand the burden he bore. Anger, long buried, started to boil over. In the midst of the argument, Stanford clutched one of his precious journals close, insisting it must be hidden far away. Stanley, in his frustration, grabbed for it, saying if it mattered so much, he'd help by taking it. They wrestled for the book, and in their struggle, they stumbled into the control console of the dormant portal. With a sudden jolt, alarms blared and the floor shuddered. Stanley stepped back, eyes wide, as the portal, reactivated by their accidental bump, hummed violently to life behind Ford. Stanford turned in horror as swirling blue light filled the chamber. The machine he had shut down, the gateway he had vowed to keep closed, was opening. Loose papers flew from tabletops, and the wind from the other side of the portal whipped around the room. Ford's coat billowed as he tried to reach the switch to turn it off, but it was too late. A tendril of brilliant light snaked out from the portal, wrapping around Stanford's waist like a glowing vine. Stanley lunged forward, grabbing Ford's arm with all his strength. For a heartbeat, the twins locked eyes. Ford's face full of fear and regret, Stan's contorted with determination and panic. "I'm sorry," Stanley shouted over the roar of the machine, not knowing what else to do, not knowing if his brother could even hear him over the chaos. In a flash that seemed to last both an instant and an eternity, the portal tore Stanford from his brother's grasp. With one last, anguished look at Stanley, Stanford Pines was pulled into the shimmering void. The light engulfed him, and then, with a thunderous crack, the portal imploded into silence. The lab went dim, illuminated only by sparking wires and the soft red glow of warning lights. Stanley fell to his knees, his outstretched hand grasping empty air where his brother had been moments ago. The only sounds were his choked breaths and the distant rumble of thunder from the storm outside. Stanford was gone, lost somewhere in the endless expanse between worlds. The days and years that followed were difficult to measure for Stanford. Time became a strange river as he drifted through one alien world after another. In the beginning, there was only a blinding swirl of color and light as the portal flung him far across reality. When he finally tumbled out onto solid ground, Ford found himself in a realm unlike any he had known. Over the course of 30 long years, Stanford Pines survived by his wits and courage in countless bizarre dimensions. He trekked under skies with twin moons. He made camp in forests of glowing trees that sang soft, unfamiliar songs in the night. He encountered towering creatures that spoke in riddles and tiny sprite-like beings that guided him for a time through labyrinthine terrains. Some worlds were harsh and desolate, endless deserts with ruins of forgotten civilizations where Ford walked alone under crimson suns. Other worlds were lush and teeming with life beyond imagination, where he marveled at floating mountains and creatures of crystal and light. In each new place, Stanford gathered what knowledge he could, scribbling on whatever scraps of paper he found, trying to keep a record of his journey and a map home. Through all those trials, the thought of his family sustained him. On cold nights, beneath strange stars, Ford would gaze at a photograph he had managed to keep. A small picture of two young boys on a beach, himself and Stanley laughing with arms slung around each other. It gave him strength when hope waned. He imagined Stanley back in their world, perhaps trying in his own way to set things right. And indeed, unknown to Ford, back in Gravity Falls, his brother never gave up on him. Stanley, devastated by the loss of his twin, took on Stanford's identity to avoid awkward questions, telling the townsfolk that he was the scientist Stanford Pines. In the years that followed, Stanley repurposed the hidden lab and cabin, turning it into a whimsical tourist attraction he called the Mystery Shack to make a living. By day, Stan, as the locals knew him, sold postcards, knickknacks, and tall tales of supernatural sightings to travelers. But by night, behind locked doors, he worked tirelessly to decipher Ford's journals and repair the broken portal. Driven by the promise he made to save his brother, the two of them, though worlds apart, were bound by hope and determination, each believing in the other against all odds. Decades passed in this way. Then, one summer day, fate drew two more players into the tale of the Pines family. A boy named Dipper and his twin sister Mabel, Stanley's great-nephew and great-niece, came to Gravity Falls to spend their school vacation with their grunkle Stan. The town's magic quickly found them. Dipper discovered one of Ford's long-hidden journals, number 3 of 3, buried in a false tree hollow in the woods. The young boy was astonished by the secrets it contained and used it to navigate the town's many mysteries with Mabel at his side, though neither child yet knew who the author of the journal truly was. Over that summer, the twins grew close to their grunkle Stan and to the strange little community, all the while unknowingly inching toward the day Stanford would return. At last, after 30 years of separation, that day arrived. Late one night in the underground lab beneath the Mystery Shack, once Ford's sanctuary of science, Stanley finally succeeded in bringing the portal back online. Dipper and Mabel, worried by their great-uncle's secretive behavior, had followed Stan into the hidden chamber just in time to witness the monumental event. The giant metal ring began to rotate and surge with energy. Lights flashed, and the entire shack quaked as the gateway between dimensions was torn open anew. With a thunderous whoosh, a figure was flung out of the portal and onto the platform. The portal shut down immediately after, the machinery sparking and winding down as smoke drifted upward. In the sudden stillness, Dipper and Mabel clutched each other, eyes wide in disbelief, and Stan rushed forward to the side of the fallen traveler. Stanford Pines, now a much older man with silver in his hair, dressed in a tattered coat and worn boots from worlds beyond, had returned home at last. Ford awoke to find himself lying on the cold metal floor of his lab, the familiar smell of earth and old books filling his lungs. Above him hovered the concerned faces of his twin brother and two unknown youngsters. Stanley helped Ford sit up gently. For a long moment, Stanford simply stared at his brother, emotions welling up that no words could cover. Then, with a shaking hand, he reached out and embraced Stanley, and Stanley embraced him back fiercely. It was as if all the years of bitterness, regret, and longing melted in that hug. Both men's eyes were damp with tears. "You did it," Ford whispered, voice cracking, realizing that Stanley had moved heaven and earth to bring him back. Stan could only nod, overcome with relief. Dipper and Mabel looked on with wonder. At last they understood. This man, Stanford, was the author of the mysterious journal Dipper had found, the very one that had guided them all summer. And he was also their Grunkle Stan's long-lost twin. Mabel's eyes sparkled with tears and joy as she bounced on her toes, unable to contain her excitement at the family reunion she was witnessing. Dipper was starstruck, clutching Journal 3 to his chest like a treasured artifact, his heart pounding with excitement to meet his hero. In the days that followed, the household at the Mystery Shack grew lively with new energy. Stanford recovered his strength, resting in a soft bed for the first time in ages, while Stan cooked hearty meals and Mabel insisted on wrapping him in warm blankets. At the dinner table, in the soft glow of lamplight, stories were exchanged. Stanford spoke in a low, gentle tone about his journey through the multiverse, choosing comforting anecdotes of wondrous sights rather than the frightening moments, while Dipper and Mabel listened wide-eyed. In turn, Dipper recounted how the journal had guided them through adventures in Gravity Falls, from chasing mischievous gnomes to outwitting a local child psychic who had caused trouble. Ford chuckled softly at their cleverness and bravery, feeling an immediate kinship with these bright young kids. They were family, after all, and he felt proud as a great uncle could be. When the conversation turned quiet, Stanford took the opportunity to sincerely thank Stanley. One night on the porch, under a sky full of stars, Ford told his brother just how grateful he was, not only for saving him, but for protecting his work and raising Dipper and Mabel that summer. Stan shuffled his feet, initially dismissing the praise with a gruff remark that it was no big deal. But Ford persisted, placing a hand on Stan's shoulder. In the cricket-filled silence of the woods, he expressed that he understood how much Stan had sacrificed and how sorry he was for their years apart. Stanley looked at Ford, and with a small smile breaking through his tough exterior, he simply said, "Well, what are brothers for?" In that quiet exchange, many of their old wounds began to heal. As the summer days gently rolled on, Stanford integrated into life at the Mystery Shack. Though he was a man of science and secrets, he found joy in the simple daily routine. He would wake early to sip coffee on the front porch, feeling the morning sun on his face, while he scribbled notes about dreams or ideas sparked by being home again. Often, he and Dipper would slip away to the basement lab to discuss the anomalies of gravity, falls in hushed, excited whispers. They pored over the journals together, Dipper eager to learn and Ford eager to teach. In Dipper, Stanford found a kindred spirit, a curious mind, and an adventurous soul, much like his own at that age. The boy's questions and insights delighted Ford, and before long, He proposed the idea that Dipper might one day become his apprentice in exploring and understanding the world's mysteries. The offer lit up Dipper's eyes. It was as if the universe had quietly aligned, giving Stanford a chance to pass on his knowledge and nurture his great-nephew's talents. Mabel, meanwhile, brought a different kind of light into Ford's life. With her boundless creativity and heart as big as the sky, she reminded Ford of the importance of fun and family. She would drag him away from his notes to join her in feeding the family's pet pig Waddles, or to admire a particularly glorious sunset over the treetops. One afternoon, Mabel presented Ford with a hand-knitted sweater in a deep maroon color, emblazoned with a pattern of six-fingered handprints. "So, you always feel one of a kind," she said with a wink. Ford laughed warmly and pulled the soft sweater on. It fit perfectly and felt like a hug. He realized these children accepted him completely, extra fingers and all, and it filled him with a quiet happiness he hadn't felt in years. Still, in the midst of these gentle days, the shadow of Bill Cipher had not entirely faded. Ford confided in the family about the lingering threat. The rift that the portal had created between dimensions was contained for now in a small, fragile device, a glass capsule that glowed with an eerie blue light. Ford kept it close, knowing that if it were ever to break, it could spell disaster. Everyone understood the gravity of this secret, and even lively Mabel treated the matter with solemn care. The family worked together to safeguard their home from Bill's influence. In one instance, taking Ford's guidance, Dipper and Mabel ventured to befriend a unicorn in the forest, succeeding, after some comedic trials, in obtaining a strand of pure unicorn hair. With Ford's careful craftsmanship, this enchanted hair was woven into a protective barrier around the mystery shack, a subtle shimmer in the air that would keep Bill's mind tricks at bay. They all felt safer knowing they had done everything possible to protect one another. But Bill Cipher was cunning and patient. As summer neared its end, the demon saw his chance to strike. Through trickery and whispers, he managed to exploit the one gap in the family's armor: Mabel's kind heart. Bill, taking on a disguised form in a moment of crisis, deceived Mabel into handing over the very device containing the dimensional rift, under the false pretense that it would help her brother. The moment the rift left the safety of its container, Bill seized it. High above Gravity Falls, the sky cracked with brilliant light as Bill tore open a portal of his own, bringing forth the nightmare realm Stanford had long feared. Thus began Weirdmageddon, a chaos unleashed upon the town. Day turned to endless twilight. The very landscape of Gravity Falls twisted and churned, with floating eyeballs and strange beasts roaming free. Buildings uprooted themselves. Gravity shifted in pockets, causing rocks and people to sometimes drift into the air, and the colors of the world bled into a surreal haze. It was as if the laws of nature had fallen asleep, and dreams, or nightmares, had taken their place. In the initial wave of weirdness, Stanford and Dipper rushed to confront Bill, trying to use a quantum destabilizer weapon Ford had devised. On the roof of the clock tower, they had a clear shot at Bill, but the demon toyed with them, and a sudden blast of wild magic threw off Ford's aim. In a blink, Bill was before them. He spoke with a gleeful malice, delighted to see the great Stanford Pines again, and taunting him for all his efforts. Bill flicked his wrist, and with an eerie shimmer, Stanford's body froze in place, transformed into a golden statue. Dipper gasped, reaching out for his great-uncle. But Bill only laughed, taking Ford's immobilized form away as a trophy. The triumphant demon declared that Ford, the one person who knew how to stop him, was out of the game. For a time, Ford's consciousness drifted in darkness, sealed in that living death of a statue. When Bill eventually released him from the golden prison, Stanford awoke to find himself chained in a bizarre throne room that Bill had created amid the chaos. A floating pyramid of mismatched stairs and nonsensical architecture. Bill needed something from Ford, knowledge. The demon was furious to discover that a mysterious force prevented him from spreading his weirdness beyond the town. An enchantment tied to Gravity Falls itself, one Ford had studied long ago. And Ford, despite the danger, defiantly refused to help Bill break that barrier. Bill's single eye flared with anger. He tried bargaining first, promising Ford power beyond imagining if he would assist. But Stanford had long learned the price of Bill's deals. He shut his ears to the demon's honeyed words. When persuasion failed, Bill turned to cruelty. Stanford endured waves of agonizing pain as Bill exerted his strange powers, trying to force the secrets from his mind. It was a nightmare far worse than any world Ford had wandered, a nightmare made real by Bill's wrath. Yet through it all, Ford clung to thoughts of his family. He pictured Stanley's face, the bravery of Dipper, and Mabel's smile. These thoughts became his refuge, a quiet place in his mind where Bill could not reach, and they gave him the strength to hold on without giving Bill what he wanted. Meanwhile, back in what remained of the town, Stanley, Dipper, Mabel, and a handful of friends who had not been captured united with a single purpose: to save Ford and stop Bill. The scattered pages of Ford's journals and his memories, shared with Dipper, provided a plan, the ancient prophecy Ford once dismissed. They needed to bring together 10 symbols, represented by 10 individuals, each connected to the wheel Ford saw in the cave years ago. The pine tree, Dipper; the shooting star, Mabel; the six-fingered hand, Ford; a question mark, their friend Sue's; a llama, a rainbow; a pair of glasses, an ice bag, a heart, and Stan's symbol of a fish. One by one, family and friends were rallied despite the strange and frightening landscape around them. They gathered at the Mystery Shack, which Stan and the kids had turned into a makeshift robot to travel safely through the weirdness. Against a swirling sky of purples and reds, with Bill's monstrous henchmen lurking at every turn, the group made their way to Bill's stronghold to free Ford. The rescue mission was daring, but their determination carried them through. Amidst skirmishes with odd creatures, they reached Ford, who was weakened but relieved to see help arrive. Mabel's grappling hook and quick thinking helped remove the chains, and Dipper and Seuss pried open the heavy doors of the cage. Ford fell into Stanley's arms, exhausted, yet comforted by the familiar embrace. In that reunion, both brothers realized just how much they needed each other. There was no time for tears or celebration yet. Bill was still at large, terrorizing the others outside. Stanford quickly gathered everyone and insisted they attempt the prophecy circle at once. He now understood that only by standing united could they summon the power to defeat Bill. On the ground, beneath the storm of weirdness overhead, Ford directed each person to stand at their place corresponding to a symbol. With a piece of chalk he carried, Ford hastily drew a large circle connecting them all. Holding hands with his family and friends, Stanford closed his eyes and focused, hoping to spark the magic that would end Bill's chaos. For a brief moment, the circle glowed and a warmth spread through them all. But as Bill's shadow loomed closer, an old fault tripped the plan. Stan and Ford, standing side by side, still harbored a shred of distrust after all their years of conflict. The subtle discord broke the circle's power before it could fully take hold. The glow sputtered out. Ford's heart sank as Bill descended upon them with a furious roar. In the frenzy that followed, Bill seized both Stan and Ford in his supernatural grip. The demon decided that if he couldn't extract what he needed peacefully, he would tear into Ford's mind by force, even if it meant destroying him. Bill prepared a deal for Ford to allow him into his mind, a necessary step due to the demon's binding rules. Ford, face to face with Bill's shimmering form, felt fear twist inside him. But then his eyes met Stan's. In his twin's gaze, Ford saw absolute resolve. And in that instant, the two of them understood what must be done without saying a word. In a final act of brotherly unity, Stanford and Stanley executed a silent plan, born of trust and sacrifice. They had only seconds. Ford pulled off his tan coat and slipped it over Stanley's shoulders, along with his thick glasses and beaten-up fez hat, while Bill was momentarily distracted by fending off an attack from the others. Stan now appeared almost identical to Ford. Catching on, Stan gave a subtle nod. He would be the one to take the risk. When Bill whirled back, he found Ford standing before him, seemingly ready to submit. Believing his will had finally been broken, the demon eagerly agreed to a direct deal. Stan extended his hand, and Bill shook it, a triumphant cackle echoing as he surged into Stan's mindscape, thinking it was Ford's. Inside Stan's mind, Bill realized too late the deception. At that same moment in the real world, the memory gun, a device Ford had built long ago to erase memories, was pressed to Stan's temple by the real Stanford's six-fingered hand. With a heavy heart, Ford pulled the trigger. A flash of light and a flurry of images burst forth as Stan's memories of childhood dreams, family moments, and personal adventures were burned away to nothing. Bill, trapped in Stan's mind, let out a distorted shriek as he was caught in the blast. The demon's form distorted, and he began to crumble, his essence unraveling like a torn tapestry. In the mindscape, Bill's pleading and rage faded to silence, and in the physical world, his triangular form turned to stone and then to ash, scattering into the wind. The nightmare was finally over. All around, the chaos of Weirdmageddon began to subside. The crimson sky softened back to blue. The wandering eye-bats and monsters dissolved into mist, and Gravity Falls slowly righted itself as if waking from a bad dream. But in the quiet that followed, the heroes did not rejoice. Not yet, for a far more personal tragedy weighed on their hearts. Stanley Pines stood there with an empty, distant look in his eyes, the memory gun slipping from Ford's fingers to the ground. Mabel rushed to her Grunkle Stan's side, calling his name with rising panic. Stan blinked at her in confusion. The man who had been their silly, caring uncle only moments before no longer recognized the children he loved, nor the brother he'd fought so hard to save. Ford felt tears well up, as he gently tried to remind Stan of who he was, his voice breaking on the words, "It's me, your brother." But Stan's face held no flicker of recognition. Heartache spread through the group as they led Stan, now just a blank, gentle soul, away from the rubble. Back at the mystery shack, the family gathered around Stan, determined to help him remember. They brought forth photo albums, mementos, anything that might rekindle his lost past. Mabel held up a scrapbook she had made of their summer together. Pictures of Stan in his reclining chair telling stories, of the twins and Stan fishing, of the family celebrating birthdays. Dipper offered the old grappling hook Stan had given to Mabel, and Seuss, the handyman who had long seen Stan as a father figure, offered Stan's trusty fez hat. One by one, they presented these tokens of love and memory to him, speaking softly about each one, recounting little anecdotes with fond smiles and tearful eyes. At first, Stan stared at the items, polite but vacant. Then, like a dawn slowly breaking after the darkest night, a spark lit behind his eyes. He chuckled at Waddles the pig snuffling at his feet, a familiar sight. He touched the fez in his hands, feeling the worn fabric, and murmured something about it seeming oddly important. Mabel gently placed one of Stan's arms around her in a half hug, just as she had done so many times before, and told him how he used to call her and Dipper his favorite kids. Dipper added how Stan had protected them more times than they could count. With each word and each object, recognition bloomed in fragments. Stan's brow furrowed, then lifted with dawning understanding. He looked at Ford with uncertainty, then at the twins, and gradually a smile curled on his lips. "Heh, why the long faces?" Stan asked, echoing a familiar joking tone. In that instant, everyone let out a breath they'd been holding. The dam broke, and tears of joy flowed freely as Mabel and Dipper flung their arms around Stan, and Ford joined the embrace, quietly thanking every lucky star that his brother had come back to them. In the following days, Gravity Falls returned to its sleepy, peculiar normalcy. The townsfolk woke from enchantments and found their way home. The forest grew calm again, the daily bird song and rustling leaves carrying on as if the chaos had been just a bad dream. Summer, too, was drawing to a close. The air held the first hints of autumn's approach, and with it came the time for Dipper and Mabel to head back to their own home. Their parents would be expecting them for the new school year. The final morning of the twins' stay, the family gathered one last time at the bus stop on the outskirts of town. The sun rose golden through the trees as Stanford stood with Stanley, Dipper, and Mabel by the dirt road. There were long hugs and promises to write or call often. Mabel handed Ford a gift, the journals he had written, which Dipper insisted Ford keep now that the adventure was complete, for now. But inside Journal 3, Dipper had tucked a photograph of the whole family together, taken just the night before at their farewell party. "So you won't forget us," Dipper said, half joking, knowing of course Ford could never. Ford placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and assured him he could never be prouder of his great-nephew and great-niece. Stanley ruffled Dipper's hat and reminded them both that they'd always have a home in Gravity Falls whenever they wanted to return. As the old bus rolled up in a cloud of dust, Dipper and Mabel boarded slowly, waving from the windows with bittersweet smiles. The Pines brothers watched until the bus disappeared over the hill, the sound of its engine fading into the morning. The silence that followed was both sad and peaceful. Ford glanced at Stan and realized this was the first time in ages they were truly alone together, with no looming crises or unspoken grudges, just two brothers on the edge of a new chapter. In the gentle quiet, Stanford turned to Stanley with a thoughtful expression. Though they had saved their town and mended their family, Ford knew their own story was not over. There was a whole world, even a whole universe, still brimming with the unknown. With a spark in his eyes, Ford suggested an idea that took Stan by surprise. There were whispers of new anomalies, perhaps in the uncharted waters of the Arctic Ocean, and Ford wanted to investigate them. But he was done with going it alone. He asked Stanley to come with him. Ford pulled from his pocket a crumpled old photograph, the same one of two young boys beside their homemade boat on Glass Shard Beach, and placed it in Stan's hand. It was time, Ford said, that they finally pursued their childhood dream side by side. Stanley's face lit up in a grin that erased years from his features. Of course he would go. Adventure had always called to both of them, and now they could truly share it. Within a few weeks, the brothers fixed up Stan's old boat, a sturdy craft aptly renamed the Stan-O-War II, and prepared it for a voyage. On the day of their departure, the townsfolk of Gravity Falls and friends they'd made along the way gathered at the dock to see them off. The lake was calm, reflecting the pale pink of dawn. Ford loaded a trunk of journals, tools, and a couple of mysterious artifacts, just in case, onto the boat. Stan packed the essentials: fishing gear, snacks, and his lucky compass. As the sun crested the evergreen hills, the Pines twins cast off. The boat's motor hummed softly, and a cool breeze filled the sails as well. Stanley took the wheel, with Ford at his side, consulting a map marked with notes of possible anomalies they might seek. They waved goodbye to the cheering friends on the shore, feeling a swell of warmth at how many lives they had touched. The Stan-O-War II glided out into open waters, each ripple of the lake catching the morning light. Stanford leaned back and gazed at the sky. Seabirds flew overhead in lazy circles, and the air tasted of salt and freedom. Stanley began to whistle a shanty they both remembered from childhood, and Ford joined in, humming quietly. As the song mingled with the gentle lapping of waves against the hull, Stanford felt a deep sense of peace. He was where he was meant to be, not in some distant dimension alone, but here, charting the unknown with his brother, his family safe and sound back home, and the wide world spread out before them. Together, the Pines twins sailed toward the horizon. The water sparkled as if welcoming them into a new adventure, one without the shadows of the past. Stanford Pines breathed in the crisp air and closed his eyes for a moment, committing the feeling to memory, hope, forgiveness, and the simple joy of being with someone who had been there from the very beginning. Whatever wonders or mysteries lay ahead, they would face them as they always should have, side by side, with courage in their hearts and the knowledge that, at long last, they had found their way back to each other. And as the boat gently drifted onward under the endless blue sky, Stanford allowed himself to just be, here and now, content and safe, carried by the currents of a story that, at its core, had always been about family and love.